What's up, guys? This is Andrew Erickson here from Gridiron Experts, and I'm coming at you live from my brand new podcast, and we're also on YouTube with the underscore. So my Twitter handle is at Andrew Erickson underscore, which is why I came up with the clever name for the new show. So I'm hoping that, I'm getting this started, right around the Super Bowl. So I don't know what the score of the game is yet, but obviously I'm rooting for the Patriots. But we're going to get into some of the Gridiron Experts articles that I've been writing and going through those and kind of discussing those. And really the main focus of the show is going to be focused around game theory. So right now I don't have a partner. It's just going to be me for now, and we're going to have other guests on from Gridiron Experts and from other, fantasy outlets. So we're going to be talking fantasy. We're going to be talking about game theory, different types of strategies, and we'll kind of see where we go from there. But I'm excited to get this show going. I really wanted to do a podcast. I wanted to do something on YouTube, doing videos, testing my prowess with some of this video compatibility and things I can do. So hoping you guys enjoy it. And I really hope that you get a lot out of it. And, interact with me on Twitter again. I'm at Andrew Erickson underscore, and you are listening to the underscore podcast. So the first thing we're going to get into today is today's main topic, which is going to be my latest article on DraftKings. So the DFS DraftKings recap, 9 takeaways from the Millionaire Maker lineups of 2018. So I'm sure that a lot of you guys have played the Millionaire Maker lineup, and it honestly sucks because you lose a lot. I've played it pretty often. I played it, you play it when you first start DFS. You think, oh, I'm going to win $1 million. Like, this will be a piece of cake. But you realize, pretty quickly that it's not so easy just to win. Setting a lineup. It can be pretty difficult, actually. And, competing in these big tournaments, it's a lot of the time you're going to lose. And you have to have that mindset going in that you are going to lose, but that, there's a process that you can follow that will give you the best chances of winning and taking home, taking down one of these big GPPs. So essentially what I did here was I looked at all of the lineups from the Millionaire Maker winning, basically the winning lineups, and I kind of came up with some strategies based on that process that I had seen through the different lineups that they had generated and the ones that had won. So, I want to share my findings with you guys there all at home, because I want to see someone that I know take down the Millionaire Maker, whether it's someone else that's at GX, whether, you just want to play fantasy one week, play DFS, play on DraftKings. That's usually the platform I play on, so that's what I'm going to be referring to. The process will probably change a little bit if you decide to play on FanDuel or something along those lines, but for now, focusing on DraftKings. But I've learned a lot, playing this past season, and, the difference between like playing a cash game and a GPP game. And if you guys are interested in learning more about those differences, I could be happy to do another podcast, another episode on that instead. But for now, we're going to look at the 17 Millionaire Maker lineups from DraftKings, and I'm going to tell you guys how to take it down as we enter into the next season here. So we're going to start off here, moving into some imagery for you guys. So number one thing here is your flex selection. So this is what I had figured out. So basically with DraftKings setup, you have a lineup that sets up as 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 1 flex, and 1 defense special teams. So the question I wanted to ask was basically, so what was the most popular option in the flex position? So keep in mind, the way that DraftKings works is that it's full point PPR. So what I found was that 7 of the lineups included 41% featured a wide receiver. And so that was 7 of the lineups. And then 10 of the lineups featured 59%. So 59% had a running back in the flex. So the running back in the flex tended to be the more used option. And it really makes sense because that's, you accumulate more touches through the running back position than you do through wide receiver. Wide receiver is just super volatile, and it's so much harder to really bank on that production always happening because that position is dependent on another player. Like if the quarterback doesn't throw the ball to the wide receiver, then he cannot produce. But with a running back, you can touch the ball through the air. You can touch the ball through the carries. So there's just more opportunities for those players to get touches and to then, transversely work into fantasy points. So That's why the running back kind of has that preference as that third spot, playing in the flex. And that's a formula I would also suggest for cash games. Playing three RBs, just, whatever, Todd Gurley, Saquon Barkley, just, toss them in, make them fit, and then kind of move on with the rest of your lineup. But in this case, though, you also want to remind that in a GPP that it's still, playing a wide receiver is still worth considering, because it is a tournament, so you are kind of aiming for like a higher upside. One thing to note, I would say probably if you want to use like a late switch, the strategy basically where you are taking your lineup and you're making a switch based on what you've seen already. So in a later game, swapping out, a player for one you already had in your lineup. So leveraging that, I think, is important with the wide receiver position. So if you do have it, you start with an RB in your flex, and then you find your lineup doing really well, and you want to make a change, perhaps, an extra stack or something like along those lines. You change to a wide receiver with a late game swap. That's definitely a strategy that you could definitely implement. So the next section here is your game stack. So I kind of preluded to this a little bit. So the game stack is essentially, playing players in the same group, saying that are correlated in production. So you have, whether it's, you're stacking a quarterback with a wide receiver, which is, a pretty often used game stack. It's really the backbone of success with the GPP lineup construction, because you're just basically, you are optimizing for the most points that you can score with one individual, set. You're basically saying there's going to be a lot of points scored in this game, so I'm going to stack the players that I think are going to score the most points. So of all the 17 lineups that I looked at, all of them use stacks. The article I wrote has them all listed out, so I'm not going to read them all off here, but they're different ways that they're set up, and I'll kind of explain basically what I kind of saw. So basically 4 of the lineups, 24% use players on opposite teams of the quarterback that they faced. So this is something that I wasn't really aware of. I would always basically, I'd set up a wide receiver, set up a quarterback, and then always set up an opposing wide receiver, because I figured, okay, well, I want them to score, and then I'm going to assume that they come back and score, so it's going to probably be the number one receiver. But that wasn't really the case with what I found. Only 4 lineups really used that type of strategy. So I think that that's something that's actually like being overplayed, really trying to fit in a receiver or another player on the opposite team, because oftentimes we see, and I wrote another article, on garbage time players, but we see sometimes when, you think that, they'll score in garbage time. Sometimes the teams are just so inept on offense. Like the Bengals, I just remember specifically the Bengals-Chiefs game, they didn't have a chance to really score those points. So it didn't really help them that they were, behind by so much, because sometimes your offense has just become so inept that it doesn't matter that you're behind a lot, or that you're in a negative game script that, will increase passing volume. It doesn't matter. So what you can do instead of playing an opposing wide receiver is actually playing the opposing running back. So 3 of the lineups that I saw use the players of the opposite team of the quarterback. 2 times it was actually Alvin Kamara, and 1 time it was Elijah McGuire. So there's actually a chance that might be a better way to look at using the running back position instead of using a wide receiver. So really stacking an opponent's running back instead of an opponent's wide receiver. And the other thing I found that was really helpful as well was looking at stacking, instead of doing QB wide receiver 1 stack, which is probably the most common, is doing a QB wide receiver 2 stack and a QB RB1 stack. So the QB wide receiver 1 stack is always going to be the most expensive and probably the most chalky of the different types of stacks, because you just assume, all right, Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, lock them in, we're good to go. It makes sense, but a lot of times it doesn't work that way. And from a pricing standpoint, as I'll get into with the other players, it doesn't always make sense to pay up at wide receiver. So, don't overlook the QB wide receiver 2 stack, and don't overlook the QB RB1 stack. The QB RB1 stack is important because it lets you you can accumulate all the touchdowns that a team scores, because if they throw a touchdown, it's going to be from the quarterback. If they rush for a touchdown, it's going to probably come from the RB1. So that's what I really like about stacking. Ultimately, or the most optimal stack that you can do is QB RB1 or wide receiver 1, because that really probably gives you the most upside, the most points that you can score. But I would say that I wouldn't go more than that. So you doing QB RB1, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 was only used in one lineup. So I know that sometimes you want to just throw them all in, but I found that really 3 players in a game stack is the most optimal play. So not doing more than 3, not doing less than 3, but 3 main guys. So obviously a quarterback, and then mixing in either a RB1 and a wide receiver 2, or an RB1 and a wide receiver 1. Maybe that's on the cheaper side. The next one that we have is leave money on the table. So DraftKings has, the way it's set up is obviously with salary, and you have $50,000 to basically, go through the salary cap and try to wiggle around. You're like, okay, I wanted to spend like this amount of money, and you really want to hit that number. But what I found is it doesn't actually make sense to try and use all your money. Leave money on the table. This is because it makes your lineup much less likely to be used. And the last thing you want to do is win the Millionaire Maker and realize someone else has the same lineup as you, then you have to share it. That is going to be a very sad story for you, and that's definitely something you don't want to have happen. So I looked at the lineups, and of the 17 lineups, 8 lineups actually spent under the salary cap, with one lineup actually leaving $600 left. And so there's a couple ways you can look at it. So you can spend the $50,000 total, and then again you can integrate a late game swap, which could end up saving some money here or there. But I would say if you like your lineup, if you like, and maybe with the GPP you really should not like your lineup, because if you like it, more often than not it's actually not going to work at all. So if you like your lineup, or you feel like, okay, this is a good lineup, I feel confident in this, like this is what I want to go with, and you have money left on the table, leave it. Walk away. Don't feel like you're forcing to spend that much extra money, because realistically you're probably just settling for a less optimal lineup because a player is priced higher. Just because a player is priced higher doesn't make them the more optimal play. But unfortunately, that's how our brains work. We see more money, so we tie that to more worth. But we have to realize that doesn't necessarily mean you just stick to what matters. And something that I've found that kind of works for me is really think about before, and you can kind of relate this to anything with gambling lines, and kind of set the line in your head before you look at the prices. So you should, if you've played for an avid amount of time, you probably have a good idea of who goes for what prices. So kind of think about some of the players, be like, okay, I think this guy will probably be around this price or around this price. And if you come in way under or way over, use that to your advantage. So if you're thinking okay, for example, there was one week with Robbie Anderson where he was severely underpriced, and people were like, all right, so how much do you think Robbie Anderson is this week? And people were like, probably $56K or whatever, and he was $45K or 4.5K, and it's oh my god, he's so under, those are the deals you want to target. And it doesn't matter that you're maybe not using all of your money. Look at that as well and say that, okay, if you want to play this player instead, play him because maybe you think that he should actually be higher priced, and that's fine. DraftKings, the prices aren't always right. Especially it seems like there's almost a week delay, because they're very prominent about getting prices out very, very quickly. So that's something that's really important, is just, leave money on the table. Don't be afraid to leave it and let it go. Next one here is quarterback matters. I know we're going to get into a lot of this type of stuff. I want to do a segment on we do RBs matter, so if you want to be on that show, you got to let me know. But for quarterbacks, it's very important that you get a big game out of your quarterback. A lot of the lineups I saw, 17 of the quarterbacks scored more than 22 fantasy points, so every single quarterback was going to more than 20. 4 of the quarterbacks scored between 22 and 30 points. 13 of the quarterbacks scored more than 30 points. 5 quarterbacks scored more than 40 fantasy points. So this is very important that you get a quarterback that hits. And that's really, when you're building your lineup, that should be one of the first things you look at. It's okay, I need my quarterback to smash. Because if your quarterback doesn't smash, you're basically toast. So that's one of the first things you need to look at. You need to look at all across the realm, who can go off. And at the quarterback position, realistically, because the volume is always pretty similar, because quarterbacks touch the ball in every single play, that volume can't really predict, he's going to have a lot more volume. It's that doesn't necessarily matter. We saw Russell Wilson this year. He basically had no volume, and he was the most efficient quarterback basically in NFL history. So you don't necessarily need volume to drive production at the quarterback position. It's helpful, and it's more okay, well, he's going to throw 60 times. You probably feel pretty good about that. But a lot of times you throw 60 times, you have a very low completion percentage, interceptions, and it doesn't really help. But here's the way that I would use to kind of target when you're looking at like ownership projections. So all 17 of the quarterbacks were less than 20% owned. So you don't really play chalk. You don't want to play chalk at the quarterback position. 4 of the quarterbacks were 2% or less owned. 7 of the quarterbacks were less than 5% owned. 9 of the quarterbacks were less than 10% owned. 8 of the quarterbacks were between 11% and 20% owned. So, and only 1 quarterback was priced above $7,000. 6 quarterbacks were priced between 6 and 6.9. 5 QBs priced between 5.6 and 5.9. 3 quarterbacks priced between 5 and 5.5. And 1 quarterback priced below 5. 11 quarterbacks priced between 5 and 6.1K. So basically what you can kind of see here is you really want to hit those quarterbacks in the mid-tier pricing. It's not about paying up or paying down at quarterback, which is kind of what a strategy you do in cash games. You just want to pay for, pay for Patrick Mahomes, whatever. Like, I just want to get the best guy, or pay for someone that's super, super cheap where you can just, get all your production out of the other players that you play. But because quarterback, anyone can really score so many points, it's those mid-tier guys that you really want to find. You want to find the mid-tier player that you really think can score the most points, that really has a high ceiling. So it's not so much about price that you should be looking at. You obviously want to save as much as you can because it's really more about the other players, because the quarterback position, like I've been saying, is like anyone can play up for it. Anybody can score plus 20. We saw it. That's why quarterback streaming is a thing, because you can get so much production from literally anybody playing the quarterback position. It doesn't matter. But it does matter if you want to take down a DFS GPP. The other thing here as well, so, if you're in doubt, I would just say, pay down at the quarterback position. I would not say you don't want to play over 7K on a quarterback. We only saw one lineup that won with over 7K. So, again, quarterbacks, they matter in real NFL, but again, in fantasy, they really don't matter. It doesn't really matter which one. It's more about, hey, what weapons are going to go off. This is the quarterback I want to lock in with, the different quarterbacks, like Mitchell Trubisky, who I think he was in like 3 or 4 millionaire maker lineups, which is nuts but he had a couple games where he just blew up, and, he was not very highly owned, and he was at a cheap price, and he was playing crappy defense. So those are the things you want to look at when you're picking your quarterbacks in that mid-tier range. My favorite part of DFS, and everyone's favorite part of fantasy football, is obviously at the tight end position. So what you want to do here is punt. Punt. You want to punt at the tight end position. That's why the important thing here is you really want to punt, because you don't need to hit on every player in your lineup. Forgive me here. This is some of the quarterback information, but I'll read off the tight end information. You want to punt at tight end because it gives your other positions an advantage to really help you get the best edge. And the tight end position is particular because you can pay down lower than any other position at the tight end. You can pay up 2.5K as opposed to receiver, running back, and the other positions, which you can only pay at 3K, and then quarterback, I think everything's above 4K. So what I saw with the tight ends was in 9 lineups, the tight ends above 4K. 8 lineups had a tight end below 4K. So in that 4K range was kind of where you were for tight end. 12 lineups actually were below 4.4, with 5 lineups paying above 4.8. So it doesn't give it a lot of sense to pay up at the tight end position. A lot of the lineups, they didn't have Travis Kelce, they didn't have Zach Ertz, they didn't have Gronkowski. It doesn't make sense to pay up because it cuts you off from playing at so many other players that just have such higher path to production. Basically, if you're in a scenario where, okay, like I can get Travis Kelce, but I have to play for a worse running back, or I can pay for Todd Gurley and I got to basically punt at tight end, you want to punt at tight end because there's a chance that Todd Gurley can score more points than Travis Kelce and that other lower running back easily. So even if your tight end literally does nothing, what it does is really opens up doors for your other position. So obviously you want to try to get points from your tight end position, but the thing with Millionaire Maker is you don't necessarily hit on every single position. You usually get basically one buy, I would say, like one player that can actually bust, and you're okay. And if you can calculate okay, well, my $2,500 player, my $3,000 player is going to bust, that's fine. You definitely want that to happen. You want that player to, hey, if he does something, that's great, but if he doesn't, whatever. It doesn't hurt me. So punt at the tight end position. Good RBs matter. So the running back position, this is the going on debate that do they matter, do they not matter? But what I will say about them is they definitely matter in DFS. Paying up for the running back position is crucial for running back success or DFS success. You want to pay up at the running back position. That's because when we see these lineups, when people played, 3 running backs, 72% of the time they were paying up for running backs who were more than 10% owned. Of that 10%, more than 65% were owned over 20% of the lineups. 28% of the time when 3 lineups were featured, they were less than 10% owned. So a very small portion of the lineups that were millionaire maker lineups that won basically paid down for low ownership running backs. So not only can you pay up for the running back position here, you pay up for the running back position and you play chalk. Like, you don't need to be contrarian necessarily with the running back position. Just play the best running backs in the best situations and move on. This isn't the strategy or the area where you're trying to go contrarian. It's not the place where you really want to gain leverage in that department. It's okay if you play the 3, most chalky running backs that everyone else is playing. That's totally fine. That's not going to make or break your lineup. If anything, that's going to help you escalate, set the bar for your team. You can get like 90 points from 3 running backs. I'll put 30 points up, and realistically, that's probably the most likely way that you're going to get it. So pay up for the running back position. That's the best strategy that I would say. From a pricing standpoint, it's very similar. Like I said, paying up. So 88% of the time in a 3 running back lineup, the running backs were more than $5,000. 41% had running backs that were more than $7,000, and 35% had running backs that were between $5,000 and $7,000. So you have coming right under, right around 40%. People are paying up over $7,000 for the running back position. That's a pretty significant margin. So if you're playing 3 running backs, you want to pay up for them. This is where you want to spend your money. DraftKings gives us salary, so we have to use it somewhere. So pay up at the running back position and do not afraid that you're paying up for chalk. Wide receivers are the key in DFS. So I talked about running backs and how running backs aren't this really where you want to go contrarian, but it's the wide receiver position is where exactly you want to go contrarian. This is where you really need to be strategic, and I think that this is really the make or break in GPP lineups, and basically how you win those big tournaments is at the wide receiver position. So essentially, when I was looking at it, looking at users when they play 3 wide receivers, 0% of the time they were paying up for running backs who were more than 20% owned. They couldn't fit them in. So essentially what happened was you can't pay up for receiver and pay up for running back. It doesn't work. So 39% of them fell in the range of more than 10% owned, but under 20%, and an overwhelming 48% used wide receivers that were less than 5% owned. So what is this saying? Again, so going contrarian, playing receivers that people don't own. Less than 5%. 50%, almost 50% of people that played in the Millionaire Maker used guys that were less than 5% owned. 61% used one that were less than 10% owned. So you need to avoid the chalk at wide receiver because the wide receiver position is the most volatile of all the positions, like tight end, but you can punt the tight end. So you need to avoid the chalky wide receivers. And again, this isn't, by me saying this doesn't mean like, okay, well, if I don't play Julio Jones, I'll win. Like, it's about finding those low-price wide receivers, those sub 4.5K wide receivers that go off. That's how you win the Millionaire Maker. Because if you play the chalky wide receiver, you're more often going to get burned, and then it's going to be the $3,000 Robert Foster that goes off for 30 points, and he's owned 2% of leagues, and everyone else played Julio, who is twice as expensive and puts up 8 points. That gives you the significant margin that you need to take down one of these GPP lineups. And the one thing I will say here as well, so avoiding chalky receivers, but there are some scenarios where you can still play a chalky receiver, but it has to do with the value of the certain player. So there were 4 times when people played 4 wide receivers, you can use a chalky receiver. So if you decide to not play 3 running backs and you want to use 4 receivers, you can play a chalky receiver. So it kind of goes in line with like the flex spot. When you play 3 running backs, you play 1 in the flex, or you play 4 wide receivers, you play 1 in the flex. That flex spot should definitely be chalk. You can kind of like put a chalk guy in there. You could be chalk RB or chalk wide receiver. So in the cases of the wide receiver position, It was Julio Jones at 7.9K, Shepard at 4.9K, Robbie Anderson at 4.5K, and Corey Davis at 5.6K. So all of these guys were severely underpriced at these certain ranges. So in essence, they were chalk, but you weren't paying up for it. So if you see a receiver that's like, oh my God, like that's too good to be true. Julio Jones, I think it was against the Bucks. It was 7.9K. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, pay up for that. Sterling Shepard, I think Odell Beckham was out. He had a great matchup. I think it was against the Redskins in the slot. Like, just pay. Like, Robbie Anderson was in a smash spot against the Packers. Everybody played him, and he was great. 4.5K. Corey Davis, 5.6K against the Patriots. Another great spot that, a lot of people saw. I was like, oh my God, like, that's really cheap. So, I would say you can still play. I would say, you want to avoid high-priced chalky wide receivers, but if you see a low-priced chalky wide receiver, I think that they are worth. I wouldn't play like all of the chalk wide receivers, but if you throw in one at a good value price, then that will definitely help you, give you another chance of taking down one of these GPP lineups. So going into more of ways to make your lineup different is your total ownership. Shout out to Robert Kraft. The total ownership across all 17 of the lineups was at 116%. So when you use different optimizers, which I recommend using, I think that it's helpful to use an optimizer or just finding ownership projections and basically adding up your percentages of ownership to kind of see like, okay, where am I at? Like, am I playing really, really super chalk, or am I going like super contrarian? Like, because again, like I'm saying, you don't need to go super contrarian. 2 or 3 guys should be enough, at the wide receiver position and maybe at tight end. 2 or 3 guys should be enough to get your lineup contrarian, especially if you leave money on the table as well. So the lineups I saw, so the lowest was 63.5% and the highest was 147%. So again, 116% was the average, but again, it just shows you don't need to be super sneaky in tournament lineups. It just takes a couple guys that not many people are on that if you have a feeling about, you've done your research. A big week for a lot of guys was like a Traquan Smith week. He was coming off a 0-point game. It was against the Eagles, and he just exploded. I was on Traquan Smith that week. I remember, like, it was just like he was really hyped up, and it was a great matchup against the Eagles. He was super cheap, and it just made so much sense. I was like, play Traquan Smith, and he was low owned, even though he was in a smash spot. The last part here, and it's the one that's probably the most frustrating for DFS players in the GPP's lineups, is the defense wins championships. And just picking a defense in DFS. It's hard. I'll definitely admit that off the bat. It is very hard to pick. You want to play, an optimal defense, but what I would recommend is, I wouldn't necessarily. It's just so hard to predict because the defenses are based on turnovers, and that's not something you can always predict. So what I would say, and what I found out kind of here is that you want to usually pay down at defense. At defense and special teams, like, it should not be a priority that you need to play, like, oh, I need to play, like, this defense. Like, this defense is good. I would just say, hey, like, try to find a value defense, someone that's, whether the price got matched up. I wouldn't necessarily say that you need to be worried if it's super high ownership. Mid-tier ownership is fine. And I would say, when in doubt, either pay down all the way or pay up all the way. That's what we saw with a lot of lineups. Like, so some lineups actually featured, the most expensive defenses. But, like, if it's, like, the Ravens against Nathan Peterman, like, pay up. Like, if it's a defense that's, like, in an absolute, like, smash spot, more often than not, they actually will hit. And you should be okay because a lot of people are going to play them. So, again, even if it's not necessarily a position where you need to go contrarian, if you are missing that smash spot defense, then just basically punt. Just go super low owned. Like I said, 70% of defenses were in lineups used were under $3,000. So again, you just want to punt it at defense if you don't think that there's really a smash spot paying up for a specific defense or special teams, basically on the slate. So again, guys, we're going to recap real quick. The final takeaways from the article that I wrote is on gridironexperts.com, and I'll have the link in the bio of the video and of the podcast if it ever gets live. We'll figure it out. Working with Gridiron Experts and the great people that work over there to make sure everything gets settled in and, we can get this podcast kind of up and running. But the final 9 takeaways. So you want to slightly favor pass-catching running back in the flex, but don't disregard the idea of using a wide receiver in your flex spot. Playing an opposing running back instead of an opposing wide receiver to your quarterback in a game stack play in addition to stacking your QB and his running back. quarterback wide receiver 2 stack over quarterback wide receiver 1 stack. If you feel like you've made the most optimal lineup, have salary left over, leave it. You hit on one of your mid-tier price quarterbacks between $5,000 and $6.1K. When in doubt, pay down at QB. Pay down at tight end, #punt. Paying up at running back, even if it's chalk, is what you need to do is sharp, and do not try to be contrarian at the running back position. Avoid high-priced chalky receivers, but if they come at a value, you can still eat the chalk. Don't worry, you can eat the chalk. Just don't fear the chalk. Fear the reaper. With defense, it's not about going super chalky or super contrarian, just really trying to find value with price and potential output in mind at the defensive position. So that's it for today's podcast and video. So I'm going to tune us out here with a little musica, if I can figure out exactly how to get it going, but we should be able to get that to happen. So thank you for watching, and I hope that you guys will come back and we can do another show. So thanks again. It could feel like floating through the air.